A poor black girl gave her breakfast to a sad billionaire. Weeks later, his lawyers changed her life forever. But before the lawyers came, before the headlines, before everything changed, there was just a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, a paper bag with a peanut butter sandwich inside, and two people who had both learned that hunger comes in many forms. 17-year-old Maya Washington stood outside the downtown Chicago library at 6:47 a.m., her worn sneakers already soaked through from yesterday's rain that had pooled in the cracked sidewalk. She clutched a brown paper bag, her breakfast, packed by her grandmother before her night shift at the hospital. Inside, one peanut butter sandwich, an apple with a soft spot, and a juice box. It was supposed to get her through until the free lunch program at school. But the man on the bench, he looked like he needed it more. She couldn't have known he was Nathaniel Cross, founder of Crosstech Industries, worth $4.7 billion according to Forbes. She just saw the expensive suit with wrinkled shoulders, the salt and pepper hair uncombed, the vacant stare of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. And she saw herself somehow in that emptiness. What happened in the 60 seconds after she handed him that paper bag would set in motion a chain of events that would expose one of the most devastating family betrayals in modern American history, and prove that sometimes the smallest act of humanity can shatter the walls around the most powerful prison. If you've ever carried pain no one else saw, stay until the end, because what happens next will shock you and restore your faith in humanity. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. From the outside, Nathaniel Cross had built the American dream with his own two hands and a Stanford computer science degree. The tech world knew him as the visionary who'd revolutionized cloud security in the early 2000s, making data protection accessible to small businesses across the nation. By 49, he'd appeared on the cover of Time, donated millions to literacy programs, and sat on the boards of 3 major charities. His Lincoln Park penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan with floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's homes. His calendar was managed by a team of 3 assistants. His marriage to Diane Cross, a former corporate attorney turned philanthropist, had been featured in Chicago Magazine as one of the city's power couples. 22 years strong, 2 Harvard-educated children, a family foundation that funded after-school programs across the South Side. Every Sunday, paparazzi caught them leaving brunch at the Hampton Social, Diane's hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, both smiling that practiced smile of people who'd mastered the performance of happiness. But for the past 8 months, Nathaniel had been disappearing. Not physically. His body still showed up to board meetings, still shook hands at fundraising galas, still smiled for the photographers, but the man inside had been slowly erasing himself, one careful decision at a time. It started small, skipping breakfast, then lunch. His assistant, Jennifer, had stopped asking if he wanted his usual order from the cafe downstairs after he'd stared through her for 30 seconds without responding. His personal trainer had been dismissed. His therapist's appointments mysteriously canceled. "You seem distracted," his business partner Marcus had said last month, concern creasing his dark forehead as they reviewed quarterly reports. "Everything okay at home?" "Perfect," Nathaniel had answered automatically, the word hollow as an empty room. "Just focused on the merger." The merger, the Singapore expansion, the new product line. Always another reason, another excuse for the shadows under his eyes, the weight loss his tailor had to accommodate twice in 6 months, the way his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. His daughter Alexis had been the first to notice. "Dad, are you sick?" she'd asked during Christmas break, home from Yale, her voice tight with worry. "Just tired, sweetheart. Work's been demanding." But it wasn't work that had been slowly killing Nathaniel Cross from the inside out. It was the truth he'd discovered, purely by accident, when he'd picked up his wife's iPad thinking it was his own. The messages had been open on the screen, not hidden, not even particularly careful. That was what had gutted him most. The casual cruelty, the laziness of the deception. As if he wasn't even worth the effort of proper secrets. "He's clueless as always," Diane had written to someone named Robert. "Mentioned the foundation gala tonight. Didn't even notice I'd already bought my dress with your credit card. 20 years of marriage and he still doesn't pay attention to anything that matters." Robert. Nathaniel had stared at that name for 5 full minutes before his brain made the connection. Robert Sullivan. His wife's colleague from her law firm days. The best man at their wedding. His friend, or who he'd thought was his friend, for over 2 decades. The affair had been going on for 3 years. 3 years of late nights at charity meetings. 3 years of girls' weekends with her book club. 3 years of business trips that lined up perfectly with Robert's travel schedule. Nathaniel had scrolled through months of messages, each one a small blade that cut deeper than the last. But the affair itself, devastating as it was, wasn't what had broken him. It was the rest of it. The meticulous planning, the forged documents he'd found in a folder labeled household bills. Diane and Robert had been systematically draining assets from the family foundation, the one that was supposed to help kids who looked like Maya Washington get access to computers and coding programs. Money meant for Southside teenagers was being funneled into offshore accounts, real estate purchases under shell companies, investments in Robert's brother's failing pharmaceutical startup, over $40 million, gone, and his own children were in on it. That discovery had come 2 weeks later, when he'd overheard Alexis on the phone, her Yale-educated voice sharp with entitlement. "Mom says we just need to keep him calm until after the Singapore deal closes. Then she'll file for divorce, and we'll have legal protection. The prenup doesn't cover foundation assets if we can prove it was Mom's project. Dad barely showed up to half the events anyway." His son Christopher had laughed in the background. "Old man's too busy playing tech god to notice his own family robbing him blind." Nathaniel had stood frozen outside his own study, listening to his children. Children he'd read bedtime stories to, taught to ride bikes, paid $80,000 a year to educate, casually discuss his financial destruction as if he were nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. The next morning, he'd begun his disappearing act. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't confront anyone. He didn't make scenes. He simply stopped. Stopped eating, because food required an appetite and he couldn't remember what hunger for life felt like. Stopped sleeping in his bedroom. Instead, taking an Uber to a cheap hotel near the airport where no one would recognize him. Stopped answering personal calls. Stopped pretending. His therapist would have called it dissociation. His doctor would have called it severe depression. Nathaniel called it nothing, because giving it a name meant acknowledging it was real. And if it was real, then he'd have to face the fact that the family he'd built his entire life around had been a meticulously constructed lie. Some mornings, he'd sit in those cheap hotel rooms and calculate exactly how much his life was worth in dollar amounts. The business, $4.7 billion. The real estate, $89 million. The cars, the art, the charitable reputation, priceless, according to the PR team. His family's love, apparently about $40 million, was the threshold for betrayal. He'd stopped going home 3 days ago. Diane hadn't even called. That Tuesday morning, he'd left the hotel at dawn with nowhere to go. His driver, the one person who might have noticed his deteriorating state, had been given the week off. Nathaniel had walked 17 blocks in yesterday's suit, uncombed and hollow, until his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto a bench outside the downtown library. The irony wasn't lost on him. The library his foundation had donated $2 million to renovate. A plaque inside with his name on it, celebrating his commitment to literacy and community. He was staring at nothing, feeling everything and nothing simultaneously, when a voice broke through the static in his mind. "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" Maya Washington wasn't supposed to be downtown that morning. Her usual routine involved catching the 6:15 bus from Englewood, transferring twice, and arriving at her Southside High School by 7:30 for the breakfast program. But yesterday, her guidance counselor had called with news about a scholarship application. There was a portfolio review happening downtown, an opportunity for early admission consideration to the Art Institute of Chicago, and could Maya possibly make it to the library at 7 o'clock a.m. to scan and email her work? Could she? Maya would have walked through fire for a chance at that scholarship. The Art Institute meant escape velocity from the cycle that had claimed her mother to addiction and her father to a prison sentence she was still too young to fully understand. It meant her grandmother, Loretta, who worked double shifts as a nursing assistant just to keep their two-bedroom apartment, might finally see one of her sacrifices pay off. So Maya had left an hour earlier than usual, her portfolio tucked carefully in a plastic shopping bag, her breakfast packed by Grandma Loretta with the same meticulous care she brought to everything, corners folded precisely, apple wrapped in a napkin, juice box packed upright so it wouldn't leak. "You eat every bite," Grandma Loretta had said, her dark hands framing Maya's face at the door. "Don't you dare give it away because somebody looks hungry. You got a big day, baby girl. You need your strength." Maya had promised. She'd meant it, too. But then she'd seen the man on the bench. At first, she'd thought he might be homeless. But his suit, wrinkled though it was, looked expensive in a way Maya had learned to recognize from her part-time job cleaning offices in the Loop. Rich people's clothes had a weight to them, a quality of fabric that announced its cost even when rumpled. His shoes were Italian leather, scuffed but unmistakably designer. Yet he looked utterly destroyed. Maya knew that particular species of sadness. She'd seen it in her mother's eyes during the brief periods of sobriety, when the weight of what she'd lost to addiction came crashing back. She'd seen it in her own reflection the morning after her grandmother had a health scare, and Maya had realized with brutal clarity that she was one heartbeat away from being completely alone in the world. This man, whoever he was, carried that same emptiness. She approached carefully, the way you might approach a wounded animal. "Excuse me, sir? Are you okay?" He looked up slowly, and Maya caught her breath. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, but there was something drowning behind them. Something that recognized her recognition. "I'm fine," he said automatically. But his voice cracked on the word fine, betraying him. Maya stood there for a long moment, her grandmother's warning echoing in her head. Then she made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. "You look like you could use some breakfast," she said softly, extending the paper bag. "It's just a peanut butter sandwich and stuff, but it's good. My grandma makes the best sandwiches." Nathaniel stared at the offering as if he'd forgotten what kindness looked like. "I can't take your breakfast." "You can," Maya insisted, pressing it into his hands. "I can get something at school. You look like you need it more than me right now." She didn't wait for his protest. She'd already used her scholarship money card to print her portfolio at the library. She'd just go without breakfast this once. It wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. But as she turned to leave, the man spoke again, and something in his voice stopped her. "Why?" he asked. Simple question. Universe of meaning behind it. Maya turned back. "Because somebody helped my grandma once when she needed it. And she taught me that kindness isn't something you do when it's convenient. It's something you do when it costs you something. That's when it counts." Then she smiled. That brilliant, unguarded smile of someone who'd learned early that joy was a choice you made despite circumstances, and disappeared into the morning crowd. Nathaniel sat there holding the paper bag for a full 5 minutes before he opened it. When he finally bit into the peanut butter sandwich, he tasted something he'd forgotten existed. Hope. And he began to cry in a way he hadn't allowed himself to cry in 8 months. Tears falling onto a sandwich made by a woman he'd never met, given to him by a girl whose name he didn't know, in an act of grace he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. It was the first thing he'd eaten in 3 days. That breakfast changed something fundamental in Nathaniel. Not immediately, Transformation rarely happens in a single moment. But sitting on that bench, eating a sandwich made with care by a stranger's grandmother and given freely by a teenager who had every reason to protect her own survival, he felt the numbness crack. For 8 months, he'd been drowning in betrayal so completely that he'd forgotten other kinds of people existed. People who gave when they had little. People who saw suffering and moved toward it instead of away. People like this girl with the worn sneakers and the bright eyes and the kind of quiet dignity that money couldn't buy. He'd spent 3 decades surrounded by people who calculated the ROI on every interaction, who smiled strategically and loved conditionally. His wife, his children, his inner circle, all of them keeping careful ledgers of what they could extract. But this child, because at 17, she was barely more than a child, had given him something with no expectation of return, had seen him at his lowest and offered not judgment, but breakfast. The contrast was so stark it was almost unbearable. Nathaniel went back to his office that morning for the first time in 4 days. His assistant Jennifer nearly fainted when he walked through the door, immediately bustling about with coffee and concerned questions he deflected. He locked himself in his office and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his private attorney, Richard Morrison, a pit bull of a man who'd handled the prenup and knew every legal shelter Nathaniel had ever constructed. "Richard, I need you to do something for me. Quietly. I need you to audit the Cross Family Foundation. Everything. Every transaction for the past 5 years." The second call was to his head of security, a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen. "I need surveillance on my wife. Cell phone records, credit cards, travel history. I need to know everywhere she's been, everyone she's talked to, every account she's accessed." The third call was to Marcus, his business partner and the only person in his professional life he still trusted. "I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I've lost my mind." By the end of that conversation, Marcus was silent for a long time. Then, "How can I help?" The audit took 2 weeks and confirmed Nathaniel's worst fears. The paper trail was meticulous. Diane had law firm training, after all, but she'd gotten sloppy in recent months. Perhaps confident that Nathaniel's distraction with business had made him blind to everything else. The foundation money had been diverted through 17 different shell corporations, then funneled into real estate holdings in Robert's name, investment accounts for Alexis and Christopher, and even a luxury yacht registered in the Cayman Islands. But the truly shocking discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon when Richard called with something unexpected in his voice. Not anger, horror. "Nathaniel, we found something else. The foundation fraud is bad enough, but there's another layer. Your wife filed paperwork 3 weeks ago to have you declared mentally incompetent. She has a psychiatrist lined up willing to testify that you've been showing signs of early onset dementia. The hearing is scheduled for next month." Nathaniel felt the room tilt. "What?" "If she succeeds, she gains control of your medical decisions, your finances, everything. The prenup becomes irrelevant. She's not just stealing from you, Nathaniel, she's trying to erase you completely. And there's more." "How could there possibly be more?" Richard's voice dropped lower. "The life insurance policy you took out 10 years ago? She's been investigating ways to access it. There are browser searches on her laptop. Accidental death litigation, inheritance versus life insurance payout, medication interactions that cause heart failure. Nathaniel, I think you need to consider that your physical safety may be at risk." The words hit him like a physical blow. His wife of 22 years wasn't just betraying him. She was systematically working to eliminate him. That night, Nathaniel sat alone in his downtown office and thought about the girl with the paper bag breakfast, about the grandmother who'd made that sandwich with care, about a life so different from his own that kindness still came naturally, that generosity still flowed even from scarcity. And he thought about the kids the Cross Family Foundation was supposed to serve. Kids like her, probably. Kids from Southside Chicago who were trying to claw their way toward better futures with nothing but determination and dreams. Kids who trusted that people like him, people with resources and platforms and power, would keep their promises. He'd let them down. By being blind, by being trusting, by being so consumed with building an empire that he hadn't noticed his family's moral bankruptcy. But he could still make it right. The question was how to find one teenage girl in a city of 2.7 million people when he didn't know her name, her school, or anything about her except that her grandmother made excellent peanut butter sandwiches and she carried art supplies in a plastic shopping bag. As it turned out, he didn't have to find her. 3 days later, Maya's name appeared on his desk in the most unexpected way possible. The Cross Family Foundation, before it had been gutted, had established a partnership with Chicago Public Schools for an annual scholarship program. 50 students across the city received $10,000 toward college and a mentor from Nathaniel's company. The applications crossed Nathaniel's desk more out of tradition than necessity. His staff usually handled the selections. But this year, drowning in betrayal and rage and a newfound determination to honor the foundation's actual mission, Nathaniel had asked to review every application personally. Application number 23, Maya Washington, Southside High School, 17 years old, 3.9 GPA, despite working 20 hours a week at a cleaning service. Raised by her grandmother Loretta Washington, a nursing assistant. Applying to the Art Institute of Chicago. The essay question, describe a moment when someone's kindness changed your perspective. Maya had written about the morning a stranger at the grocery store paid for her grandmother's medication when their insurance had denied the claim. How that $60 gesture had taught her that the world ran on more than just transactions and debts. How she'd promised herself she'd pass that kindness forward, look for moments where she could be someone's miracle, even in small ways. I try to remember, she'd written in careful, heartfelt prose, that everybody's fighting battles we can't see. So when I see someone struggling, even if they look like they have everything, I try to show up for them the way that stranger showed up for my grandma, because you never know when your small gesture might be the thing that saves someone's life. Nathaniel read the essay 3 times, his hands shaking. It was her. It had to be. The timeline fit, the philosophy matched, and the photo attached to her application showed the same bright eyes and quiet dignity he'd seen that morning outside the library. The girl who'd given him breakfast when he'd forgotten how to feed himself. The girl who'd seen his invisible suffering and responded with grace. The girl whose money his wife had been stealing. Nathaniel closed the file and made a decision that would change everything. He didn't call his lawyers immediately. First, he needed to understand the full scope of what Maya was facing, what her life looked like beyond a scholarship application. Sarah Chen, his head of security, was thorough. Within 48 hours, Nathaniel had a picture of Maya Washington's life that made his chest physically ache. The apartment in Englewood, a modest 2-bedroom in a building with peeling paint and a broken elevator. Rent, $950 a month, which was $300 more than Grandma Loretta could consistently afford. 3 eviction notices in the past 2 years, each time resolved at the last minute through payment plans or emergency funds from the church. Loretta Washington, 63 years old, type 2 diabetes, working 50-hour weeks between 2 nursing homes because health care wasn't free and her granddaughter's future wasn't negotiable. Her daughter, Maya's mother, Tamika, was currently serving a 2-year sentence for possession, the 3rd incarceration in Maya's young life. Maya herself, up at 5 a.m. every day, taking 2 buses to school, maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working evening shifts cleaning offices, including, and this detail made Nathaniel's breath catch, including the very building that housed Crosstech Industries. She'd probably emptied his trash, cleaned the bathrooms on his executive floor, vacuumed the conference rooms where he made billion-dollar decisions. and he'd never noticed her. The Art Institute scholarship she'd applied for? Full tuition, but it didn't cover living expenses. Without the Cross Foundation's support, she'd have to turn it down even if accepted, opting instead for community college and continuing to work full-time to support her grandmother. Every financial document Sarah provided told the same story. A family holding on by their fingernails, doing everything right, working themselves to exhaustion, and still barely surviving. Meanwhile, his wife had stolen enough money to fund scholarships for 800 kids like Maya. The rage that had been simmering in Nathaniel for months crystallized into something harder, colder, more determined. He called Richard Morrison back. "I'm ready to move, but I want to do this strategically. I want every media outlet in Chicago to know what she's done. I want the foundation board to see the evidence. And I want to make sure the money goes where it was always supposed to go." "Nathaniel," Richard said carefully, "if you go public with this, it's going to be brutal. Your family will be destroyed. Your reputation will take hits. Your children—" "My children helped steal from their own scholarship program," Nathaniel said flatly. "They chose their side. I'm choosing mine." The confrontation happened on a Wednesday evening, calculated perfectly. Nathaniel had arranged a foundation board meeting, but hadn't told Diane the real agenda. She walked into the conference room expecting routine business discussions, Robert Sullivan at her side. He was on the board too, a detail that now seemed almost satirically audacious. Instead, she found Nathaniel, Richard Morrison, 2 FBI agents specializing in financial fraud, and a forensic accountant with 300 pages of documentation. "What is this?" Diane demanded, her polished composure cracking immediately. "This," Nathaniel said quietly, "is the end of your charade." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in the dismantling of carefully constructed lies. The forensic accountant walked through every transaction, every shell company, every forged signature. The FBI agents explained the federal charges being prepared: embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Diane tried denial first. "This is insane. Nathaniel, what are you doing? You're clearly not well." "The incompetency hearing?" Nathaniel interrupted. "Already canceled. Turns out when you present evidence that someone's trying to have you declared mentally unfit while simultaneously robbing you, judges take that pretty seriously." Then she tried deflection. "If there were any irregularities, it was Robert. I trusted him to manage the foundation finances. I had no idea." "Your digital fingerprints are on every transaction," Richard cut in. "Your laptop, your passwords, your handwriting on the documents. You can't possibly think— You want to ruin your own children?" Diane's voice rose, finally showing the panic underneath. "Alexis and Christopher are your legacy, Nathaniel. You'd destroy them over money? They're adults who made adult choices. And yes, Diane, I would destroy them over money that was supposed to help kids who actually need it." That's when the door opened and Alexis and Christopher walked in, flanked by 2 more attorneys. "Dad," Alexis started, her voice dripping with the condescension she'd perfected at Yale. "You're embarrassing yourself. Mom said you've been acting erratic, but this is—" "Save it." Nathaniel's voice was ice. "You're both named in the civil suit. The FBI has recordings of you discussing the theft. You celebrated draining the foundation at Christmas dinner. You called me too stupid to notice while eating the meal I paid for." Christopher's face went white. "You were recording us?" "Your mother tried to have me killed," Nathaniel said flatly. "Did you know that? Or were you just focused on your inheritance?" The room went silent. "That's a lie," Diane whispered, but her face betrayed her. The FBI agent stepped forward. "We have your browser history, Mrs. Cross. We have text messages between you and Robert Sullivan discussing medication interactions. We have a recorded conversation with a private investigator where you inquired about making your husband's death look accidental. This is beyond financial fraud. We're looking at conspiracy to commit murder. Maya Washington had given Nathaniel breakfast and accidentally saved his life." The darkest moment came later that night, after the FBI had taken statements and Diane had been arrested, her $800 silk blouse a stark contrast to the handcuffs. After Christopher and Alexis had been escorted out by their own attorneys, their faces masks of rage and betrayal directed at him, as if he were the villain in this story. After the board had dissolved into chaos and emergency votes and calls to PR firms. Nathaniel sat alone in his penthouse, the one he'd shared with Diane for 15 years, now echoing with absence, and felt the full weight of his demolished life. His marriage, a lie. His children, co-conspirators in his destruction. His foundation, a front for theft. His reputation, about to be front-page news in the worst possible way. Everything he'd built. Gone. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights blurring through tears he finally allowed himself to shed. And he thought about a teenage girl with worn sneakers who'd given him a peanut butter sandwich and asked for nothing in return. She'd shown him what his life had been missing, not money, not success, not the performance of perfection. Humanity. Simple, uncalculated, freely given humanity. He picked up his phone and called Richard Morrison one more time. "I want to do something," he said. "Something that matters." 7. The fight for justice and redemption arc. The media explosion was immediate and brutal. Chicago Tribune. Tech billionaire's wife arrested in $40 million foundation fraud. Wall Street Journal. Crosstech founder files for divorce. Names children in civil suit. CNN. Charity scandal rocks Chicago's elite. Nathaniel had prepared for the onslaught, but the reality was harder than he'd imagined. His face was everywhere, the narrative spinning in real time. Diane's legal team was already crafting a counter-narrative. Devoted wife driven to desperate measures by husband's mental health crisis and affair. A complete fiction, but effective in the court of public opinion. Robert Sullivan issued a statement claiming he'd been manipulated. Alexis and Christopher released a joint letter describing their father as unstable and financially controlling, painting themselves as victims of his sudden cruelty. The Crosstech stock took a hit. Partners whispered nervously. The board called emergency meetings. But Nathaniel had Marcus at his side and Sarah Chen and Richard Morrison, and he had something his wife didn't. The truth. Meticulously documented. More importantly, he had purpose. "I want to make this right," he told the foundation's remaining honest board members in an emergency session. "Not just prosecute them. I want to actually fix what they broke. Every dollar they stole, I want it to go where it should have gone, to the kids who needed it." The forensic recovery would take months, but Nathaniel was patient now in a way he'd never been before. He liquidated personal assets to immediately fund the scholarship program, $15 million from his private account as a stopgap while they untangled the fraud. Then he did something unexpected. He made it about more than just justice. He made it about transformation. "I want to expand the program," he told his team. "Not just college scholarships, mentorship, job placement, mental health services, support for the families, everything these kids need to actually succeed, not just survive." His CFO raised an eyebrow. "That's going to cost. I have $4.7 billion. I think I can afford to actually use it for something that matters." But there was one specific person he wanted to reach first. Finding Maya Washington wasn't hard anymore. He had her scholarship application, but approaching her required delicacy. He couldn't just show up at her grandmother's apartment like some savior figure. That felt exploitative, performative. Instead, he had Richard Morrison reach out to her school counselor with a carefully worded message. Maya had been selected for the Cross Foundation scholarship, and Mr. Cross himself would like to meet with her to discuss mentorship opportunities. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Hyde Park, halfway between their worlds. Nathaniel arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first business pitch 3 decades ago. When Maya walked in, accompanied by her grandmother, a dignified woman with silver hair and kind eyes who looked exhausted down to her bones. He stood immediately. "Maya," he said. Then, to her grandmother, "Mrs. Washington, thank you for coming." Maya's eyes widened in recognition. "You're the man from the library, the breakfast." "I am." Nathaniel's voice caught slightly. "And you're the reason I'm still alive." For the next hour, sitting in that coffee shop while the Chicago morning unfolded around them, Nathaniel told them everything. The depression, the betrayal, the morning when he'd been too numb to care whether he lived or died, the sandwich that had broken through, the discovery that Maya's scholarship application had led him to, the fraud that had stolen from kids exactly like her. "I'm not here to play hero," he said. "I'm here because you saved my life and I want to honor that. And because my family stole money that should have gone to students like you, I can't undo that betrayal. But I can try to make it right." Grandma Loretta spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the weight of 63 years of dignity earned through hardship. "Mr. Cross, my granddaughter didn't give you that breakfast expecting anything in return. That's not who we raised her to be." "I know," Nathaniel said. "And that's exactly why I'm here. Because kindness without expectation is the rarest thing in the world, and I've learned it's worth everything." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, full scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago, including living expenses, a job offer as a design intern at Crosstech Industries, paid, and a check for $50,000 in Grandma Loretta's name. "Back pay for cleaning services," he said, though they all knew it was something more. "I can't," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You can," Nathaniel said gently, echoing her words from that morning. "And you will. Because there are 50 more kids in Chicago who need to see that hard work and kindness still matter. That people with power will sometimes do the right thing. You're not just accepting help, Maya. You're proving that the Foundation's mission still means something." But the fight for justice was far from over. Diane's trial began 3 months later, a media circus that dominated Chicago news for weeks. The prosecution was airtight. Richard Morrison had built a case that was unshakable. 40 million in stolen funds, 17 shell companies, forged documents, and the absolutely damning evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Diane Cross was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Robert Sullivan got 12. Alexis and Christopher, given lighter sentences due to their ages and lesser involvement, received 3 years each and a lifetime ban from serving on any nonprofit board. The civil suit recovered $31 million of the stolen funds. The rest was gone, spent on luxury that couldn't be reclaimed. But Nathaniel had already replaced it from his own pocket. 18 months after a poor black girl gave her breakfast to a sad billionaire outside a Chicago library, Nathaniel Cross stood on the stage of the newly renamed Cross-Washington Foundation headquarters. Yes, he'd added Maya's name over her embarrassed protests, and looked out at 50 scholarship recipients and their families. Maya stood in the front row, now a freshman at the Art Institute of Chicago, flourishing in ways that made his heart ache with pride. Her grandmother sat beside her, healthier now with access to the medical care the foundation provided for all recipients' families. 2 years ago, Nathaniel began, his voice steady, I thought success meant wealth, power, and a perfect family. I had all those things, and I was the most miserable man in Chicago. He paused, gathering himself. Then a 17-year-old girl taught me what actually matters. She didn't know who I was. She didn't want anything from me. She just saw someone suffering and responded with kindness. That single act of humanity saved my life and changed everything I thought I knew about value and worth and what it means to be successful. Grandma Loretta was crying openly. Maya's hand was clasped in hers. So today, I want to announce something new. The Cross-Washington Foundation isn't just about scholarships anymore. We're launching a mentorship program that pairs every student with someone from our corporate network. We're opening a community center in Englewood where kids can access art supplies, tutoring, and mental health services for free. We're funding a grandmother support program for kinship caregivers like Mrs. Loretta Washington, who sacrifice everything to raise someone else's children with love and dignity. The room erupted in applause. And we're establishing the Maya Washington Award for Everyday Kindness, $100,000 given annually to someone who, like Maya, performs extraordinary acts of grace without seeking recognition or reward. Because I've learned that those are the people who truly change the world. After the ceremony, as people milled about eating catered food and celebrating futures that suddenly seemed possible, Maya approached Nathaniel with something in her hand. "I made this for you," she said shyly, extending a small canvas. It was a painting. Two figures on a bench, one offering something to the other. The colors were muted, the style impressionistic, but the emotion was vivid. Above it, in careful lettering, "Sometimes saving someone else is how you save yourself." Nathaniel accepted it with trembling hands. "Maya, you changed my life," she interrupted softly. "But I need you to know something. That morning, I was having the worst day. I'd found out my mom's parole was denied again. My grandma had been crying all night because the rent went up. I was ready to give up on the scholarship, on art school, on everything." She paused, tears glistening. "Then I saw you on that bench, and you looked like you needed help more than I needed that sandwich. And helping you reminded me why we keep going even when everything is hard. So yeah, maybe I gave you breakfast, but you gave me purpose. You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have." Nathaniel pulled her into a hug, this brilliant young woman who'd been born into circumstances he'd never have to imagine, who'd carried burdens that would have crushed someone twice her age, and who'd somehow maintained the kind of humanity that his privileged children had never developed. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for feeding me when I'd forgotten how to eat, for saving my life." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for proving that the world can still be good." 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning that mirrored another Tuesday morning from 2 years prior, Nathaniel stood outside the downtown Chicago library at 6:47 a.m. This time he wasn't broken. He wasn't empty. He was waiting. A group of Cross-Washington Foundation scholars arrived, Maya among them, all heading to volunteer at the new community center before their college classes. When Maya saw him, she grinned. "Mr. Cross, what are you doing here?" He held up a paper bag with a smile. "I made you breakfast, peanut butter sandwich, though I'll warn you I'm not as good at it as your grandmother." Maya laughed, that brilliant, unguarded laugh that had been one of the first beautiful things he'd heard after months of darkness. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through his. "You can help us set up the art studio. We've got 10 kids coming in today who've never held a paintbrush. It's going to be amazing." As they walked together toward the community center, billionaire and scholarship student, saved and savior, family chosen rather than born, Nathaniel thought about the long, strange journey that had brought him here. He'd lost his wife, his children, the family he'd thought he'd built. But he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: purpose, community, and the kind of connection that only comes when you stop performing and start living with authenticity. And it had all begun with a girl who'd seen past his expensive suit to the suffering underneath, and had offered the only thing she had: breakfast and kindness. Sometimes, Nathaniel had learned, the poorest among us are the richest in the things that actually matter. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to let someone else save you first. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and comment the emoji that represents how you feel. Let's spread kindness together.